China celebrates the new year and President Xi Jinping delivers a major address to the nation. Hello, I'm Arnold Knight and this is The Heat. Chinese President Xi Jinping has delivered a televised New Year speech to the nation. He praised China's efforts to fight COVID-19 in what he called an extraordinary year. He also outlined the country's major achievements on the economic front and lauded China's efforts to eradicate poverty. President Xi also looked ahead to 2021. We begin with this report from Beijing.
President Xi said 2020 was an extraordinary year as the world has been facing the coronavirus pandemic. He praised the Chinese people's contributions to the fight against COVID-19.
用众志成城、坚韧不拔，书写了抗疫史诗。从白衣天使到人民子弟兵，从科研人员到社区工作者，从志愿者到工程建设者，从古稀老人到90后、00后、青年一代，无数人以生命负使命，用挚爱护苍生。
The president talked about China's economic resilience and highlighted the country's major scientific achievements.
我国在世界主要经济体中率先实现正增长，预计2020年国内生产总值迈上100万亿元新台阶，粮食生产喜获17连峰，天问1号、嫦娥5号、奋斗者号等科学探测实现重大突破。海南自由贸易港建设蓬勃展开。
China vowed to eradicate extreme poverty by the end of 2020, and the country announced this had been accomplished. When recalling his visits to poverty-stricken areas, Xi spoke highly of the efforts made by rural people and the officials in charge, and he reminded everyone further efforts are needed for the goal of common prosperity.
历经8年，现行标准下，近1亿农村贫困人口全部脱贫，832个贫困县全部摘帽。我们还要咬定青山不放松，脚踏实地加油干，努力绘就乡村振兴的壮美画卷，朝着 共同富裕的目标稳步前行。
In 2021, the Communist Party of China will turn 100. President Xi said the CPC will continue to put people at the center and step up efforts to realize the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. Looking forward, President Xi encouraged the Chinese people to strive for a better life and brighter future.
There is lots to discuss, and joining me now from Beijing is Qinduo Xu. He is a senior fellow at the Pangoal Institution, and he's the host of CGTN's Dialogue Weekend. Also with us from Portland, Oregon, is Liang. She is a professor of economics at Willamette University. With us too from California is Douglas Paal. He is a non-resident scholar for the Asia program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And here in Washington, D.C., we are also joined by Sourabh Gupta. He is resident senior fellow at the Institute for China-America Studies. Welcome to all of you. Qinduo Xu, of course, the pandemic was the story that dominated 2020, and President Xi started his address on that very subject. He praised China's solidarity and resilience in dealing with the outbreak. What was your overall assessment of the address as he looked back at 2020 and looked forward to 2021?
Well, I think, President Xi used the word extraordinary. That's the right, proper word to use. It is unforgettable year for the Chinese people, of course, just like any other countries. Chinese people sacrificed because of the virus. The economy once stopped for a while. And of course, because of the, I would say, effective centralized nationwide response system, it worked pretty well. And the Chinese economy became the first to recover, and now basically there's full recovery. And so there's a positive growth over there, and people are bringing their lives back to normal. So that's something for a lot of people to feel proud of, and they have more confidence in their own system, in their own ability to deal with a mysterious virus, at the beginning, unpredictable. Nobody knows what kind of virus it is, but still they managed to contain and prevent and control the virus finally. Of course, the story is not end yet, and so the country is still, keeping vigilant against the spread of the virus. But in general, that's a very impressive job. So the people feel the same way as the president has said over there. I would say that's unforgettable, and also a year of full of achievement. Let's say eradication of extreme poverty. Everybody knows that, had this sense of poverty reduction over there. And also, the scientific research, exploration of the space, moon landing, and also the diving deep into the sea, etc. And also China has achieved, for example, the opening up not only inside China with a free trade area, but also, for example, RCEP trade deal with the Pacific Ocean nations, and also has completed the negotiation with the European Union on the investment deal. So that's a pretty, I would say, very impressive achievement for the year 2020, despite the pandemic.
All right, Qinduo, before we move on, I want to ask you just one more thing about the coronavirus pandemic. President Xi has been urging international cooperation to fight the pandemic. China has just approved a vaccine and plans to inoculate something like 50 million people by the Lunar New Year, and that's not far away. Any indications on when this vaccine might be made available to other parts of the world, other countries in the world, especially poorer, developing countries?
I'm looking forward to the visit by Foreign Minister Wang Yi, which will start actually in a couple of days on January 4th, to 5 African countries, including Nigeria, DR Congo, etc. So I'm expecting, one on their agenda that we'll touch upon, obviously, anti-epidemic, efforts or cooperation between China and those developing countries. I think a Chinese vaccine, as said, promised by the Chinese government, will be presented as a public good, not only for the Chinese people, but also mostly for the developing countries. I think it will probably they will work out applying, how to, export and the use of that vaccine in like African countries. We know it's already being used in Indonesia, in Turkey, like UAE, etc. But hopefully, more and more countries from the developing world will start the introduction of the Chinese vaccine. Of course, there are some other choices too, but that is one of the choices.
All right, Liang, let's talk about how the Chinese economy performed in 2020. President Xi noted that China was the first country worldwide to show positive growth in 2020. China's GDP is expected to grow, or expected to reach 100 trillion yuan for 2020. How well is China's economy poised for 2021, given that many of its major trading partners were also hit very hard by this virus?
Right, that's a great question. I think, as the previous panelists addressed, that because China has made really effective efforts to contain the virus, so China was the first country that ride out of the pandemic, and because of it's able to restore the production line, so it was able to supply to the rest of the world a lot of essential equipment and many other exports. So that helped to drive the economic growth, and not to mention the government's policies, the fiscal stimulus, infrastructure construction, and also consumption support. So all these helped China to rebound and solidify its growth. So going forward, I think China still has really great potential to continue to grow, and a lot of the estimates have put China's growth rate next year at about 8%. So I think China is starting at a very solid ground. That said, there are a lot of challenges. Like you said, the rest of the world are still battling with the virus and still recovering their economy. So the global environment will be challenging, not to mention the US-China trade tension, which is continue to evolve. But I think as long as China is able to take effective measures to boost domestic demand, to develop its own technology, to continue with its reform and opening, and manage financial risks, I think China will be continuing to grow at a healthy pace.
Douglas Paal, looking at foreign trade, in 2020, China edged out the United States as the EU's main trading partner. In fact, the EU and China have just announced an investment deal. It still has to be ratified by the European Parliament. It's not a done deal yet. But what kind of response do you think there will be from the incoming Biden administration to this kind of agreement that we just saw?
Well, I think they're signaling that they're concerned. Jake Sullivan, the appointed new national security advisor, tweeted the concern about better consultation with Europe as it goes forward with this sort of agreement with China. The U.S. was hoping to ally with the European Union more effectively to try to shape the way China allows investment and practices trade, things like the state-owned enterprise subsidies and the like. And this is a little bit of a setback to their ambitions coming in as the new administration in Washington.
Douglas, notwithstanding the fact that the Biden administration would see this, the incoming administration, I should say, should see this as a bit of a setback, but to what extent does this deal, and it's a massive deal, reflect what is really a changing world?
Well, the Europeans want to have a better stake in the Chinese internal production and the market in China. That's been retarded by considerations of China's less developed status, developing country status over the years. Now that China is a major figure in production and trade, they have to take an appropriate level of responsibility for reducing barriers to other participants in that. And China has its own good reasons to be expanding investment, especially in financial services where China is deficient.
Sourabh Gupta, if this deal moves ahead, and we don't know that yet because it has to be ratified in the European Parliament. There is some opposition among deputies in the European Parliament to this deal. But if it moves ahead, how significant will it be, not just for China, but for other economies in Asia as well?
Well, I think for China, it is going to be immensely significant. I would actually put it as the most important economic instrument signed by China since its WTO accession in 2001. And when people look back in time on this deal, I think this signing will represent the most important instrument signed by China in its second phase of reform and opening up, its second round of reform and opening up. So it's of that magnitude. I understand Ambassador Paal's issues with what might be the case, but my sense is that the European Union has been no less aggressive than the United States in terms of disciplining China's industrial subsidies and state-owned enterprises. We'll have to see when the text is out, and as they themselves have mentioned, it still might be quite a few months before the final T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. But the European Union has been very, very clear for the past year and a half that it wants China to go the full distance in taking on advanced country commitments in this regard. So I would not fear in that regard. Of course, the implementation of that will be a multi-year process because the way state-owned enterprises operate in terms of competitive neutrality terms, etc., will take time to implement. Therefore, I think this is a huge deal, and I think it's very important, more for China than the European Union. But I also think it's a very good signal that Asia remains open, ready to do business, and that they're moving from taking heavy trade-related disciplines, embracing strong trade-related disciplines, to also embracing important capital market and investment. happens.
Right, Sourabh, this is, of course, an investment deal, but are there any strategic implications in this? It was, after all, the U.S. National Security Advisor, the incoming National Security Advisor, who made one of the few statements on this.
Yes, there are strategic, I would say, geo-economic implications here. And I think there is something that the EU is trying to signal to the US out here, which is that, yes, just because we have a Democrat coming into office, that doesn't mean EU is just going to roll over and let the US take the lead out here. The EU has its interests, it has its own voice, and it's going to pursue that aggressively. And over and above that, I think the EU is also trying to signal to the US that, hey, with regard to China, we know there are national security related issues in terms of technology, trade, etc. But the US has gone too far unilaterally using the national security guys to choke off a lot of trade with China. This has implications for the EU too, because a lot of US parts and components are embedded in EU products which are sold in the Chinese market. And the EU is generally signaling out here that, if China is ready to play by advanced country investment disciplines, and the US still stands on the lines that it is going down on, there's a good chance the US products and parts and components might be designed out of EU products which are sold in China. So to some extent, the US needs to get its trade and investment house in order so it can also participate and in a win-win economic scenario, because everywhere else liberalization is happening with the EU, with the Australians, with the UK, with Canada, with Japan, with China, and with RCEP and emerging Asia. The US is out, and so it needs to get back into the game. And that's what I think they're trying to signal.
Qinduo, you talked a moment ago about developments in Chinese space exploration, in developments in Chinese space technology. President Xi mentioned that in his speech. He talked about China's recent lunar mission, for instance. What is your view on the technological progress that China has made in 2020?
Well, I think probably the biggest takeaway in 2020 is like a wake-up call for the Chinese science community and also the manufacturing sector. That is, some of the U.S. companies they have cooperated with probably are not that reliable because of strategic concern from Washington or security concern from Washington. One typical example is the cutting off of the supply of semiconductors. That affects not only Huawei, but also dozens of Chinese companies in different sectors. So the wake-up call, the realization is like China, for some of the key technologies, China has to, or was, I would say, has been compelled to innovate by itself. Mm-hmm. So there's huge investment from the Chinese government as well as in private sector to develop some of the key technologies. So more reliance on the Chinese economy, and that of course will help boost the consumption and also the domestic market build up, I would say. So in that sense, that's part of this development plan for the 14th five-year plan and also for the next year. You can see like in the Central Economic Conference, which concluded not long ago, so 8 tasks, the top 2. The top one is about science and research. The second one is about the key technologies. So it is a priority for the government and for the society.
Liang, what do you see as the main challenges for China in 2021?
I think there are 4 major challenges. The first one is, again, how to boost domestic consumption demand. Right now, if you look at China's sort of internal debate, a lot of scholars and experts focus on the so-called upgrading consumption to promote the so-called new consumption, which include, for example, online consumption, experiential consumption, and other types of consumption that combines technology, such as 5G, big data, etc. But I think we definitely need to go beyond that. We need to create more high-paid jobs, stable jobs. We need to redistribute income. We need to develop rural areas, etc. The second challenge, I think, is how to accelerate green revolution. After all, China still rely on fossil fuel to provide about 78% of its energy consumption. So how to develop carbon capture and store technology, how to develop the alternative energies and improve energy efficiency in order to reach carbon neutrality by 2060. I think that's a very daunting task. And the third is to manage financial risks. This is not to manage the debt to GDP ratio, right now exceeds 300%, but also how to strike the balance between regulating finance and to promote financial innovations and inclusivity. And I think last but not least, it's really how to develop the technology. I think the previous panelists had talked about the difficulties. And so I think, after all, I think China needs to develop its own technological capacity, but also diversify its partnership. Right now, China imports about 50% of its IP from just 3 countries, Germany, US, and Japan. And I think China needs to diversify its technological sources.
Douglas Paal, looking at some of the phrases that President Xi used in his address, he said, and I'm quoting here, "The whole world is one family." He talked about the significance of a community with a shared future for mankind. And I'm wondering, to what extent was this an invitation to the United States to actually get back onto the whole idea of multilateralism, and also, in a sense, a rejection of President Trump's America First policy?
Well, I'm not sure I see it that way. I didn't read much in the way of an invitation to cooperation with the outside world in this set of remarks by President Xi, except when he referred to coming together to continue to combat the effects of the COVID pandemic. The shared vision for mankind is really a Chinese idea which has not found itself very marketable outside of China. And I don't think it's a successful path to winning greater support for that vision. This is, as in previous years, this is a self-congratulatory address by the leader of the country, which highlights the successes they've had and doesn't really examine those areas that have been difficult, and leaves foreign policy to other forums. I didn't read much, therefore, of an international message in what he had to say.
Qinduo, on that last point that Douglas Paal made there, that it was a congratulatory address in many ways. It didn't address issues that difficulties that China faces, I should say. What are the challenges that China faces?
Well, challenges, is long term. I think right now it's really about to keep the economy continue to grow, and of course, we have talked about on this show actually the dual circular economic, the new paradigm. Basically, you probably focus more on the domestic economy, domestic market, while continuing to develop the international market over there. But the domestic market, of course, on one hand, you have investment, probably continuous investment, heavy investment in some of the sectors. But as the previous speaker has mentioned, the key challenge is really the consumption. You want to boost the consumption, but that's a long, obviously, it's a process. You cannot somehow achieve that overnight or within 1 year. That remains a challenge for some time to come, I would say, because that's a systematic job. It's not about like handing out cash to the people so they can spend. It's about reducing the concern or the worry about their for example, the medical service, education burden on that, and also improving people's income in the way of creating more high-paid jobs, for example. So that takes a lot of work. That takes a systematic efforts for the Chinese government and the Chinese market to really produce the desired result. 2019, 55% in less consumption contributed to the percentage of 50% of the GDP.
Yeah.
2020, actually, it's not that much growth. So,
right.
So it will grow, but it's too slow, probably.
Sourabh, as President Xi said, 2020 has been an extraordinary year. The pandemic hit the world, and we saw multiple countries as the year came to a close, including China, produce vaccines to fight the virus. What are your predictions for 2021? Could we see a big bounce back, or will the world still be dealing with the fallout from the coronavirus pandemic for years to come?
Oh, there will be a short-term bounce back. There's no question about that, and that'll be a good thing. But I think we should be paying attention to the medium term, where I think the growth prospects would be more or less depressed rather than on the upside. And that's why I think this is an important moment in as we enter 2021 to focus on the main challenges which the virus has presented and which can be tackled in a coordinated way at the international level. Obviously, the most important would be how the major powers, particularly US and China, as well as the EU, can get together on global public health and have the broadest, the widest spread dissemination of the vaccine. That will be the best way, because until everybody or most people are vaccinated, we'll never be beyond COVID-19. Secondly, an area where there's an immense scope for cooperation is major parts of the world coming together in something with regard to debt suspension, debt forbearance, poor markets, poor countries, etc., as well as debt restructuring or debt waiver altogether. And I think these are important things which need to be done in 2020 if we have to have progress, economic progress down the line.
Okay, Qinduo Xu, I've just got about a minute left. One other thing I want to address. President Xi noted in his address that 2021 will mark the 100th year of the anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party. What can we expect from China to mark this centenary?
Well, there will be a lot of, let's say, stories and a review of the 100 years of CPC. There were great achievements. There were, of course, some mistakes, in particular after the founding of the nation. And, learn from the lessons and learn from your mistakes. And then I would say mostly is really look into the future and how to continue to build, the country into a stable, peaceful, and prosperous society. So people will feel proud of the country, people feel proud of the nation, people enjoy their life inside this country.
And very quickly, I've got 10 seconds, Qinduo Xu. That goal to achieve a moderately prosperous society, is it on target?
I would say so. We actually are supposed to reach that target in 2020, but it is a little bit.
Okay.
Hopefully 2021.
We are going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. Thanks for joining us, and a Happy New Year.